I'm Ondřej Trhoň, and you are listening to the Research with Art podcast, where I try to answer the question, what does it mean to do artistic research today? Welcome to the first part.
How do we want to relate? How do we want to create an economy?
In terms of more human and societal transformation.
It's January 3rd, 2023.
What you're hearing are sounds of Half Life, Half Alive, a 12-hour event dedicated to reflection of artistic research that took place at the Academy of Fine Arts in Prague on 24th November 2023. During, I spoke to 4 participants that will help me not only to map the terrain of artistic research today, but also answer the question why any artist could and should consider dipping their toes into waters where art and research meet. The first is Florian Dombois, a professor of transdisciplinarity at Zurich University of the Arts, an artist who works with time and models, landforms or seismic and tectonic activities. Following his lecture Thinking in the Wind, we talked about how artistic research can disrupt the stale waters of art production, complicating the myth of genius artist, the idea of art as a commodity, or even the way we think about artists as endowed by human agency. And also what pleasure has to do with all of it. In your talk you mentioned that in 2006 you wrote a manifesto about artistic research, and I just want to very basically ask, how would you revise it? What has changed? What new avenues for artistic research have you found since then that are personally interesting to you?
In 2006, the situation was very different. The term research was not so much around. I started actually from a very different perspective. I was invited to build a transdisciplinary encounter between the arts, and I used the term research to kind of bring people together on an eye level, because a lot of the ideas around were about opera as a collaboration of the arts or whatever, and these are very hierarchical spaces. And then I thought research is a better approach to kind of destabilize hierarchies between the arts. And then I realized how much people were offended those days about the term research, and everybody got really emotional. And I thought this is as a good starting point to discuss art again, because the 90s were for me a period where people were getting so cynic and so much about attention, etc., and not talking about why we are doing it. So it was kind of creating a fire that you could kind of use. My personal rereading would be that it's not so obvious in the manifesto, but those days I was more concerned about the outcome and not so much about the people. And now I changed and I realized we really have to focus on the researchers or the artists in their practice and see research kind of from the perspective of interaction, how people interact and how we relate to each other. That was not so prominent there.
Would you draw, or is it even possible to draw any kind of line between collaborative art pieces, which we see a lot, and artistic research as a collaborative art practice?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think the terminology of research allows for certain changing collaborations. So there's one aspect is questioning the solo genius artist that works on its own and is becoming kind of a articulation of nature, and then everybody's happy that we have this kind of model person that kind of does it for us. So I'm working a lot with artist collectives also. I like how they kind of, it doesn't mean that they are questioning the idea of the commodity of the art object, right? So the art object that comes out of an art collective can be also a commodity. And with this research terminology, I think we are more focusing on how we want to relate to each other, how we want to challenge each other, and what are levels of sharing. So you might still continue your individual practice, but with this research terminology, you have certain points where you meet like today. So in that sense, it's an exciting moment, for instance, how you set up everything downstairs to make us meet.
Yeah, I was wondering with the triple instrument project you mentioned that maybe what is like what the research kind of term brings into play is something almost like open access. You presented this website where you share this kind of knowledge. So I assume that like in more like artifact or the genius artist oriented model, you would not necessarily make this additional infrastructure for sharing what you found, right? Or am I reading it wrong?
No, absolutely. The kite flying is a kind of a reason to come together and to watch and listen and be exposed to something that you cannot control, which is the wind, which is super open access because we all breathe it and we are all part of it. And flying it outside is, when you listen to it and you are exposed to the wind, is super exciting because you are in it, right? So it's not something that you can package and then deliver and put in a white cube or in a black box. And it is open access, absolutely. There's an economic idea behind open access, obviously. And I see myself obliged that, because I'm stately funded with this project, that everything that comes out should go back to the community. So that's why we produce these manuals and encourage everybody to copy. So we put all our knowledge in a way so that everybody can copy. We are not taking ownership. Became more interested now, meanwhile, also into the question of folklore, because folklore is for me at the moment something like an anti-idea of the solo artist, because it is poetic, it is artistic, but you don't know the author really. So folklore arises from somewhere. But we see now museums are protecting certain folklores, for instance, right? But nobody thinks about how new folklores can grow. So part of the project of flying every month in this Maria is to create a folklore, because the wind is super nice there. It's really a very special laminar, beautiful wind. And there has been no artistic and no folkloristic dealing with it. And maybe, I don't know, I mean, you never know if the community picks it up, but it's an opportunity to develop it also beyond our presence.
Would you say there's an inherent institutional critique to artistic research? If like artistic research, by not being sellable, not being, as you said, like hard to fund, isn't inherently challenging to the structure of the art world per se?
Well, it is challenging because we have a visibility, and when we go back to this 2006 manifesto, the term research had a huge career in the years after in galleries, and then Documenta picked it up in 2013, etc., etc. So the art market tries to incorporate it, but still there's this battle between the collectors and their power game that they play on the art world, and we are able now to fund people that can make partly a living of it. Also, I'm not totally only against the art market, but I would say it runs dry if it has no areas where something can be developed, right? So if you are only paid by the product and not by the effort or the love or the time you put into the development, then it cannot develop, right? And you stay in a circle. But these research frameworks allows us to develop stuff, and there are projects, side projects that can go also into a more product-oriented.
What would you say to somebody who has been, I guess, more traditionally trained in like artifact-oriented art making? Maybe they studied the MA and BA like here in academy or something. And what would you say to entice them or like even spark their interest into the artistic research to do like PhD, I don't know, with you or somewhere else? Like what are the affordances that they would get to explore? What are the most interesting to you also personally?
My criticism on the art market is that it is so super conservative. If we look to the last 80 or 100 years, starting from Dada, etc., we had so many kind of moves that try to get away from the artifact, and they always lose ground after a while. And I think it's a new way of kind of allowing for non-artifact based things. So how can we see, as I mentioned, art as something that is more than simply producing a fetish object that you can keep at home, right? For me, it's very much a situation, as we had the intensity just 10 minutes ago downstairs. So the intensity you cannot put into an object. So we need to allow for these kind of practices as well. We need both. Right? If you're studying here, why would you make a PhD?
Not necessarily here, but like I don't know, if you've been making sculptures for 5 years and now you hear this word artistic research.
Well, I mean, when I'm going to an exhibition, I have to say that sometimes I'm bored. For the reason that I'm going to a gallery and I'm repetitively seeing objects that have the size that they can go through the door. So if I'm going into the room, I'm seeing actually the door that is kind of giving the size of what is possible inside, A. And then B, these white cube spaces are also very much related to our colonial history and our colonial attitude of how to deal with nature and how to deal with the environment and how to deal with society. And so I think that there is a good reason to question the museum room. I've been repetitively open windows in galleries, making it transgressible. I really love, like Helen is now digging outside, and we all went to the window to look outside, so to make us aware that we are not in a kind of closed space that is kind of decentralizing the rest. There's Edouard Glissant, who wrote this relational aesthetics, and this whole idea that colonialism is so much related to the center versus the colony, right? So in a way, these white cubes also form centers, and I think it's much better if we kind of break down the walls and open the windows.
When I was listening to your presentation and I read that you studied philosophy, right? I don't know if there's any interesting comment you'd have on your specific relationship between philosophy and conceptual thought and artistic research.
The talk was called Thinking in the Wind. So obviously, for me, artistic practice is something that has to do with thinking, but not only verbal thinking. And I see a big move in the humanities, also in philosophy, to go beyond the verbal. And so there we relate, but still, I don't think it's the same. So extending the modes of expression is not enough for me to make it artistic. But it's a shake hands, right? We see things happening, and this whole art-science debate is sometimes helpful to get into the debate, but then it's also a burden because you don't get out without having these biases. So sometimes I'm insisting on art is different from the sciences, but sometimes I don't know.
Right. If I'd ask you to think about some hashtags about artistic research, what would they be?
Relation, different ways of communitizing and decommunitizing, coming together and leaving each other. So this kind of how we as humans kind of are relating and disrelating, and not only through the abstraction of social media reality representation. I mean, the way we move in the world is more and more in kind of human spaces, and the transgression between the human and the non-human has to become more fluid. I mean, I'm one of many voices who are saying that at the moment. I think it's really a huge opportunity for us to do that. Another hashtag might be a non-biasing, or like Donna Haraway's this nature-culture approach. I think it's really interesting how to overcome this bias of us and them, the othering. Then non-solo artists, I think is super interesting. Maybe that can be a pre-Renaissance art questions. Pre-Renaissance engineering is something that I'm quite interested in. Yeah, society, how do we want to live post-capitalism? How can we survive? I mean, there's so many things at stake. The clock is really counting the time. We urgently need to move, and we need to reinvent what are our values. But we have to stop economic growth. We have to. We cannot continue. But nobody knows how can our economy run without growth. Spending time flying a kite is not growing in a way. It's trying to deal with how to value our time on Earth, or our lifetime, with something that is not only on producing, consuming, extracting or whatever, right? We need to create other modes of living. And in that sense, I think kite flying is more than a children game, much more.
To kind of wrap it up, you mentioned that for you artistic research, or your projects that are artistic research, are a playground but also pleasure ground. So if you could briefly say what's the pleasure part for you personally? Because I can imagine that there's a multiple meanings of word pleasure, right? So what's yours?
The term pleasure ground is a reaction on this idea that research should be painful and labor and kind of exhaustive. And I would like to prefer to say intensity or commitment or really being involved or something like that. I'm really with that. But pleasure is intensity and involvement. And as I said, if we want to raise new values and we want to seduce us all to get away from certain ways of consuming, we need alternative pleasures that are not consumptious and that are not extractivist. So in search for this, artistic research should be not re-educating. There are so many reasons why artistic research is had a career in our discourse. Mostly it was coming from outside institutional interests, also I think even anti-artistic interests, right? Like to get it small or to suppress artistic, poetic attitudes, I would say. And so there's an intrinsic idea why we are fighting for it. Or a lot of artistic PhDs I've seen in the past, I'm not so happy what I saw, because what I saw are pseudo-scientific, super academized artistic practices. So there is a danger also of missing the artistic qualities, right? So the PhD is very often assumed to be anti-artistic almost. My way of answering is with the pleasure. Instead of being, getting into the war of fighting it, why not using this opportunity? Because I see there is an opportunity for us. I like that opportunity, enjoying to do it. And that we take care that it is a place that allows us to make art, because I believe in it.
Oh, that's a beautiful ending. Thank you so much.
Thank you for the questions.
What follows is a conversation with Markéta Dolejšová from Aalto University and Hee-jeong Choi, affiliated with Amsterdam University of Applied Sciences. We spoke about their joint practice spanning fields of design, art, non-human ethnography, feral spaces, and more than human worlds, and how drawing lines between art and traditionally understood science is perhaps both unsustainable and unproductive. So to kind of kick off things, I would like to know, since you're based in research, participatory and social research, what are the affordances of artistic practice and this intermingling with artists to the design practice?
I would like to not see them as separate areas completely. I think that there are many common things in both, like practice-based research in art and design. But then, of course, we are often drawing on different literatures coming from different epistemological backgrounds. But I see that whether we want it or not, artistic and design research are cross-pollinating each other. It just depends on us if we want to have this cross-pollination happening, if we want to see it, if we want to make it happen. So coming more from design background or being trained as design researcher, I'm thinking, for instance, based on the experience today, that there is a sense of fluidity, for instance, at this conference that I feel is quite accommodating for certain type of thinking. So being here more as a design researcher, it offers a different rhythm for how I can express myself, how we express our research. There is a different sense of boundaries of how do we even define what research is. So for me, that's quite interesting.
So what about you, Jazz? And please feel free to even give examples from your practice, your as a plural.
Yeah, I agree with Markéta. I don't think we need to divide them. Since when did we feel that we need to actually segregate things? Disciplines or, even practices. But who can call, this is a legitimate question. Are you legitimately an artist? according to whom? But why does it matter? I think those are the questions that we really need to think about. And really, with different media as well, and there's digital, there's bio, all these things are happening. And now we have to work with all sorts of different people with different backgrounds and skills, experiences, including humans and other than humans anyway. So the creativity, imagination, all of those, of course, are great. But what's important, I think, whether we talk about affordances or, anything really, for me, what's really important is how can we not kill art and instrumentalize it? That would be my main question or answer. Very completely strange answer to your question, I think.
No, that's totally fine. I would be inclined to ask about the potential, I assume, collisions between art, as not instrumental art, and more traditional methodologies, right? Because I would imagine to writing a paper about a dog guiding you through some sort of more than human practice. How does that align with traditional, Harvard citation reference, academic apparatus?
It doesn't. But that's our practice as well. I think we see ourselves as researchers as well. So, and practitioners, both. We do both. When we do research, in our practice, we have to try to change. That's our job, to question the system, challenge it, and see if it open up. Because I think we know this already from all this, again, the legitimacy of knowledge. What is counted as knowledge? That has been controlled fundamentally by Western science. So we know we have to challenge this anyway, and many people have been. In Australia, where I was based before moving to Europe, there's this category when you research outputs, the name for creative outputs, they're non-traditional research outputs, NTRO. That's a really, really strange name. Yeah, and it's problematic. So yes, we're challenging this. It's not easy, but that's what we have to do.
Can you elaborate just very briefly on maybe what you presented about the project and how what you just said in kind of a more abstract way, how it materializes in the more concrete way of your own research?
In the context of the Open Forest project, for instance, which is also where this collaboration with Choi as a non or other than human co-author of a research project, what Jess mentioned, this focus on change. If we are trying to work towards change, if we are saying that we are trying to change something towards more livable futures in the world, we really need to also start from the recognition of we have to change ourselves as a community. The Open Forest project, where we started operating as a multi-species collective, having Choi included, as long as it was artistic practice or creative practice, nobody would question anything. The moment where we publish a paper that, as you mentioned, has a DOI and it's an academic research paper, then suddenly there are some boundaries, there are rules, and suddenly a thing that is actually commonsensically completely okay. Actually, what is the risk involved in having Choi named as a co-author? Suddenly it becomes problematic because there are existing boundaries, there are existing rules, and they are not very flexible. But we are operating within these rules and we claim that we are trying to make change. So we have to actually talk about these rules. We have to talk about these existing systems and start changing them before we start saying that we want to change the world. The Open Forest project allows us to do that. And it's not always super enjoyable because you need to do a lot of justification. Like, for instance, in this case of trying to justify and reiterate and repeat why it is important, why it is really key for us to have acknowledged that there was a knowledge co-produced together with a dog that needs to be, not just deserves, but needs to be acknowledged in a research paper. Otherwise, what are we doing here? I think that this was one of the key messages that we tried to say in the lecture today or in the talk. It's the question of why are we doing this? It's not what are we? Are we doing art? Is this artistic research that we are doing? Is it design research? Is it even research? The question for us is why? Why are we doing all of this? Why are we here? Why are we trying? Why are we spending our lives? Why are we spending time on things? And that's, for me, the most crucial thing, which requires us questioning the infrastructural rules and the paradigms and all these dominant normatives, basically, that shape our practice.
What do artists coming into these sorts of projects bring? And how does this interplay between design background, not as a practice, but like just a set of training methods and stuff, interplay with the set of artistic training?
creatures is a good example, no? Artists bring knowledge. That's the answer. Everybody brought some knowledge. And the knowledge can be new to the other people who are involved, right? So this was the main point, to work around this idea of, is there a transformational aspect of creative practice, like creative practice in art and design? Is there something that art and creative practice in general do in the world that can help to move the world towards some kind of more livable future? It's such a broad question, but what we were trying to do is to work around this together. And it wasn't important if nobody was wearing a name tag, I'm an artist, I am a researcher, I am a scientist, because we were shape-shifting, we were doing different things. We had our open forest where we were the creative authors of that, but we were also writing papers, collecting data, we were curating actually public engagement occasions, curating the whole laboratory actually. The boundaries were very fluid, and that, at least for me, made a lot of sense, because we were again not focusing on who are you, what are you doing, but why are we doing it and how can we do it together. So it was about a common direction.
As with anything, I think it's a different kind of language. So there's no difference. What can scientists do? Lots of things. What can artists do? Lots of things. But I think what's really beautiful and unique and what we need to cherish about art is, as Markéta also mentioned, fluidity and openness. And we're kind of okay with indeterminacy. Not everything has to be defined. And really the humility of knowing we can't articulate everything. I think art, there's such power in that. And art existed in everything through all this history anyway. So we're simply saying, but it hasn't been recognized as more of a, knowledge domain as compared to, say, hard sciences. So I think really now we're saying, hey, that's not okay. By bringing art into everything we do, we're not doing anything new. We've been doing this all the time, throughout history, or her story, the stories, So nothing new, but we need to find, especially if we want to talk about research, we need to find the way to really better recognize the power of art and creative practices and how we can coexist with different languages. That's all it is, I think.
And how are institutions faring with that project? Since we are talking about the conference at Academy of Fine Arts, which is, I guess, one discursive constellation. Then you mentioned Ouroboros Festival, which is more like media arts tech focused thing, right? But you're also publishing. So how are we doing with platforms for this kind of practice you two are doing?
I mean, number one, I think if we're dinosaurs, universities, if we don't change soon, we're going to die off. So I think it's very important that we recognize this and how knowledge is produced and shared. That's where we are. And I think we're going to see more and more Ouroboros type of really interesting hybrid. What is this feral creature? What is it? I think we'll see more of those emerging. And we have to work with it together rather than, that's not what we're about. For me, it's a matter of you're right, I'm right, you could be right too. It's not one of us can be the only right one.
And there is also this aspect of the willingness to actually understand each other. So it needs to start from there, right? So although it's important that we question each other, what are we doing? For me, there needs to be the willingness to listen to what you have to say. And I will consider it, I will think about it. It's not that I come to the place and have my own truth about the world, about the situation, and I am not willing to change that. Then we are in kind of a blind spot. Then nothing ever moves anywhere.
Circling back to artistic research, I just want to ask if you'd be tasked with thinking about hashtags for artistic research, what would they be?
I mean, better be feral, no?
Better be feral or better be hashtag feral?
That's it, the second, hashtag feral.
It doesn't have to be precise. It can be it's associations, basically what I'm asking about, just using the hashtag as a job start.
I would like to leave the hashtag open for others to fill it in based on their experience of what really happened to them, If I would summarize what is happening to me today in hashtags, that's just my experience. So if I can use my space to have a hashtag, I would leave it hashtag and dots and write what is artistic research to you.
Beautiful. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Well, thank you.
The first out of 2 parts of this podcast ends underground, unearthed by a shovel of Helen Mydland. Mydland is a professor from University of Bergen, educator, curator and artist working, among other things, with archaeology. We met in the backyard of the Academy of Fine Arts, where we talked about artistic research as a critical practice that can dig up undiscussed assumptions, create inverse sculptures and reflect on both art and science.
Can I ask you a few questions
sure.
on your practice?
Yeah,
This
that
is
would
great.
be. Yeah, digging and talking is the
Yes.
best because that's the whole point.
What does digging entail as an artistic research? Just so very basically.
Yeah, no, and I've been asking myself this question because since this piece is called Why Dig? This is also what the question I actually literally ask myself while I'm digging, and I think I get different kind of answers each time. I mean, who digs? Just now, in this moment, I think there's farmers around digging, there's probably road workers, constructors, buildings, stuff like that. There's also people digging graves. There's people in Palestine and Ukraine digging for belongings and their loved ones. I mean, why do you dig? It's for different reasons, either for finding something, but also maybe for creating something.
A negative sculpture, as you said, in relation to more traditionally oriented, artifact-based artistic practice, right?
Yeah. And for me, I think particularly what I find artistic research is giving me the space to actually subvert kind of the object-focused art market. So I'm not making a commodity. Also from the traditional clay and ceramics, which is my speciality, it's about the object, and here is on the contrary. I have to relate to what is an object. Is this stone an object? Is this root an object? Is this, here's actually a bit of clay. Is this an object? But in a way, they're not important. And actually, it's for me choosing not the objects, but the physicality of making something. I've been thinking about how all this material is super compressed. If you look behind me, I have all the soil. So seeing also that I'm entangling actually this mass, I'm showing a different side of it or a volume to it, I'm disturbing it. I was thinking that probably the trees are quite pissed off because I'm messing with their roots right now, and also the worms and the bacteria and the fungi here is also probably wondering what's going on. So it's both in a way exposing but also erasing something at the same time. So again, I'm not finding a form, I'm finding this place in a way for me. This time, I've kind of grounded myself here in the backyard of the Art Academy in Prague. And yeah, it's a very different experience from, for instance, the last time I was digging.
How so? What was the last time you were digging, when you were digging, what you digged for?
Yeah, then just 10 years ago, and it was one of the first pieces I did for the artistic research project I was leading at that time called Topographies of the Obsolete. And I was digging in the backyard of a gallery in Stoke-on-Trent in the UK. And this way of situating oneself, I think particularly there, the abundance of objects and existing historical objects kind of spurred me into doing something which was more about absence or what was not there in a way. Because also when you're digging, one thing is the things you find, but you should always also question, what do I not find? Both in archaeology and art, I think. For me, doing or approaching history or the narrative of retelling, creating and shaping history is kind of core in my artistic practice in the first place, because as I said earlier on today, I think history is not something which is done and dusted, and it's a solid. It's created literally here and now. This is when we're creating history. Just when you came in, that's already history, and we are already retelling that story probably differently in our own head.
In the podcast as well.
Exactly, and so this kind of, also by doing these things, I'm trying to also dissolve time a bit, really to focus on that the present is when we create both the past and the future in a way. We're projecting both ways in the now. and also the importance of that history is never told, or it's never finished being told. It's not one hit narrative, it's always retold, and that it changes all the time. It's just as malleable as clay and this soil, It's this kind of way of doing it, scraping, I'm destroying it a bit, I'm exposing it, it's going to be tumbled around, when I put this dirt back, the history of this place is changed. And, even what am I interpreting this is, it's storytelling for me.
Right, I'm inclined to ask one very basic question, because this is a podcast about artistic research for the artistic research platform here at Academy. You have these papers here, which I haven't read through them all, I'm sorry, but they are talking about this archival and also archaeological maybe turn in the arts. Yeah. So where would you say is the difference between artistic research that's archival and art that's archival? If that's even a way to situate it, right?
Archival art can have research aspects to it and all of that, but I do think the research aspect comes into the context of which we are sharing. And the way I'm trying to reflect upon my practice, and for instance, with this, that I'm trying to both reflect on and show and do kind of artistic research method, how I use this physical method as a way to understand how I'm researching. What can I, as an artist, how can I work with history?
Right.
Or the present, for that matter, this kind of, and this is my method of doing this. And of course, as an art, if I were doing this just in the quotation marks as an artist, I think the focus would be different around the spectacle of it, and more again, for instance, the negative sculpture and artist, or kind of the performative aspects of this, while of course this also becomes a way of reflecting. My way of working with methodology I can share with other researchers and students and artists, and really go kind of behind the scenes, because I think
it's open in a way.
Exactly, because also I think the research is primarily for the peers in a way. That's the research bit, that us as artist researchers can actually, another artist in 50 years for that matter, can look at how I've been working with this and use it in their own research in terms of either vocalizing or developing or physically making art and research, etc., and also challenge it, redeem it, redundant, and completely of this time, and etc. And I think this is what you usually do not do as an artist, or at least it's not part of just the show.
Right.
You maybe do it in your own practice, but usually the gallerist or the curator is not so interested in it. Or the public, maybe. I don't know. I'm using the methodology or a very traditional methodology from archaeology. This is also, in a way, it has impact actually on archaeology. I've been having lots of kind of collaborations with archaeologists in my practice, and for me, kind of, because in a way I'm also putting up a mirror for them. Right. They're familiar with this. I'm using this as a mirror for my own artistic methods, because sometimes they get so intrinsic and so intimate that I can't really see them. But when I'm doing it like this, I can yeah, of course. I start I understand much more of my own processes. And also, for instance, I've been thinking a lot about the hierarchy of attention. Why do I give value to certain things? Why do I make these choices? And I can actually mirror my sculpture practice, for instance, in a different way, and start kind of, unpacking my own practice.
Are there any interesting conjunctions, I don't know, when speaking through these different spheres, areas?
Archaeology is a relatively new research discipline in the first place. We are artistic research even newer, and it's also challenging, because when I say but what again informs the choices you make for a dig? Of course, there's starting to become a larger focus again on the more hermeneutic, or kind of the interpreting qualities, or more the humanistic tradition in archaeology. It's been extremely run by a much more kind of evidence-based kind of practice with DNA samples, or carbon-14 dating. So you have facts in a way. But And even today, we talk about, in archaeology, the kind of rational decisions for instance, finding where people live. Well, it would be rational to be with water and food, for instance, But then again, we see in archaeological material, like Jericho, which is one of the most famous archaeological examples, is without both. But people were not irrational. They just have a different rationale there. So artistic research in many ways, particularly when it's working interdisciplinary, can be part of really developing and questioning both methodology, the choices you make, and that kind of discussion in also, for instance, the bodily experience of digging, how much that actually influenced anyone, or how your eye, I'm looking for this kind of coloration changes in the earth, which is a traditional kind of archaeological kind of way of looking for traces of buildings, etc. But for me, it's, like I said, finding a green thing was very, pleasurable.
Right.
Also because my favorite color is green. Again, I'm not neutral when I'm digging. I'm also at one point, in the beginning, I'm enthusiastic, I'm fit. Now I'm starting to get really tired, and that kind of numbs me a bit. So this kind of also understanding how much you as a bodily presence when you're digging. And these discussions are always very interesting to have with other disciplines in a sense. Artists working with kind of have been always appropriating other methodologies, ethnography, anthropology, medicine even, And I think in that way we're kind of putting up mirrors for ourselves, but also for the other disciplines to actually unpack their own ground research in a way, things they take for granted.
You also chose a very aesthetically pleasing string here.
Exactly.
So you're an artist after all.
Yes, of course I am. And, all of these things, it's the most beautiful thing. I have this, it's matching my this. It shows even when it's getting dusk. You see the handle on my shovel. The whole kind of setup. I've been working with this as an on-site installation, the way I've placed the text. I'm using the stones I've been finding. Some of the texts are hidden in the leaves. That's also reminding me, of course, I am really not an archaeologist, so when I'm digging, what do I use? What are my toolbox? And the aesthetic toolbox is an extremely powerful one.
You're estranging it as well from the original practice.
Yes.
I guess.
Yes, I think I am. You can maybe call it a simulacrum. I mean, that could be quite interesting. Or, this kind of copy which takes on its own life. So I've always kind of been working around there, this kind of what's real, what's pure, what's not, why do we think this is better than the other. For instance, one thing I was thinking just before you came is that in the beginning I took care of all these round stones, but now I see there's so many, so I don't bother anymore. And just this kind of, why is being plentiful not interesting? Why am I only looking for the unique things? The scarcity of something makes it more valuable. And it's such kind of a basic human reaction to stuff. I mean, we like diamonds and gold because they were hard to find, all this. It's really not rocket science, but it's still this kind of, but where do I also apply that in my own practice? Thematically, when I'm working with art, why do I not go into this area? Why do I have to find something very special? Or And then, of course, this kind of the whole idea about how we are, of course, driven about, in terms of Western art, about the unique, the genius, the forefront of something. And of course, this is questioned in contemporary art today in general, but I mean, we're still very much in the same spot in a way.
But also like question of history and memory as well, like history of civilizations or whatever. Yeah.
Just before coming here, I was in Uganda, and of course they have very little material culture. Or it's not, of course, but their architecture is mainly of clay or kind of transient materials, which doesn't to that extent, but it's still there. But there's different signs, and we're not used to looking for those signs, for instance. It's at least, for me, important as an artist, always remember to really also question myself and my own practice. It's not one way forward in a way. And as a researcher, I have the time for that, and the obligation to do it, I think.
If I'd ask you to think about hashtags for artistic research, what would they be?
I think even just doing a hashtag for artistic research is a good one, to be quite honest, because we have to... No, but seriously, it's kind of, we're so good at referencing absolutely everything else than ourselves in a way. And for me, it's also, I was a student in the 90s where, art theorists and curators really came front stage. And, I had, actually, I think Lars Vilks, the late professor and artist, said, it's not art before it's commented. And personally, no. I'm not kind of material deliverance. I think there's a lot in artistic research going on around, and we're not good enough in terms of actually sourcing it out. It's easier to go to the usual kind of art references in a way, which works also, of course, in the rest of the art world, which we are a part of. But so I think actually just by using #artistic research. And then, take it from there, right?
It's a great meta answer. It only fits together with your meta practice as well. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the first part of Research with Art podcast. For the second installment, that is hovering somewhere around this one, I talked to Irina George, a director of the newly founded large AVU, Laboratory for Art, Research and Graduate Education AVU. Tune in to find out what vision she'll bring to Prague, why artists should resist illustrating other disciplines, and what questions should you ask yourself before deciding to go in the artistic research direction. I'm Ondřej Trhoň, and this podcast was created with the support of a grant from the National Recovery Plan awarded to the Academy of Fine Arts by the Ministry of Culture of the Czech Republic in 2023.